Hello and welcome to Making the Switch, the second of Zero Emissions Byron's EV Revolution webinar series. I'm Mick O'Regan and I'm your moderator tonight. In this second webinar of 8, we're joined by Anthony Broese van Groenou of the Good Car Company and Carola Jonas, the CEO of the electric vehicle charging solutions company, Everty. Welcome to you both. Zero Emissions Byron warmly thanks its sponsors, including our principal sponsor, Bank Australia, major sponsor, NRMA, community sponsors, Club Car, Anova Community Energy, and Light Touch Solar and Electrical for making this webinar series possible. Their ongoing support is deeply appreciated. Now, before we kick off, one important housekeeping note. For people wanting to ask a question of Carola and Ant, I'm going to get you to go to the Q&A interface. So not the chat window for questions, please use the Q&A interface. So without further ado to our guests. As I mentioned, Anthony Broese van Groenou is the co-founder and director of the Good Car Company. Ant founded the company with Anton Vikström and Sam Whitehead last year in 2019. And the vision was to make buying electric vehicles more affordable for Australians. He's also a PhD researcher and he's looking at socio-technical systems and modelling the uptake of EVs, identifying both opportunities and barriers for an equitable transition. Carola Jonas is the CEO and co-founder of Everty, an electric vehicle charging network and charging station management software solutions company. Everty works with EV owners, with businesses, with utilities and other organisations to increase the uptake of electric vehicles and making EV ownership and use easier. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you both, Ant and Carola.
Thank you.
And so Ant, to start with you, take us into the Good Car Company world.
All right, I'll just share my screen. How are we doing there? Is it the right screen?
Looks good to me.
Looks good. Okay, wonderful. So, yeah, we're the Good Car Company. We set up to decarbonize transport, and the way that we're doing that is by making electric vehicles affordable. So, it's us, that's me on the left, Anton in the middle, and Sam on the car, and we're the Good Car Company down in Tasmania. We are branching out into the eastern seaboard. We're doing work in Melbourne, Victoria, Canberra, and Queensland. So the problem is that we need electric vehicles to decarbonise transport. Electric vehicles currently cost too much money, and the greater benefit of EVs to society and the electricity systems can't be realised until there's a critical mass of cars. So most Australians want to get behind the wheel of an electric vehicle. And the problem is, they don't want to spend more than $30,000. And that leaves them in a bit of a pickle because new EVs are priced from, well, minimum $55,000. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to decarbonise our energy and transport systems. I'm doing a PhD on the topic and I sit on a state electric vehicle working group. And one of their initiatives is to encourage fleet uptake to have a flow-on effect by creating a second-hand electric vehicle market, which is a brilliant idea, but it's one that still has a 3 to 5 year lag time. So our solution is create a second-hand electric vehicle car market from scratch. We deliver affordable EVs by importing quality electric cars and vans from Japan and the UK to deliver brilliant, affordable EVs. So in short, this allows people to drive away in an electric vehicle from $19,000. We started with the 24 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf. And it's actually that little red one that's in the middle there. I still get really sentimental about it. That was our first car. The 24 kilowatt hour Leaf has about 120 kilometre range and costs around $19,000. So it's a sweet car at a great price. And considering that the average Australian daily commute is around 40 kilometres, we figure that that should suit most people. You can just plug it in at home to regular power point, and in the morning it's good to go. We also have the 30 kilowatt hour Leaf, which has even more bells and whistles in it and gets around 170k driving range. We're also doing the new model of the Nissan Leaf, the 40 kilowatt hour, which is similar to those ones sold in Nissan dealerships around the country. And we're also doing the 62 kilowatt hour E+ long range Nissan Leaf. So that gets around 150k range, and unless it's imported, it's not available in Australia. We are also doing our first electric vans and wagons. They're on their way to support the commercial market. So these come in 2, 5 and 7-seater options in 24 kilowatt hour and 40 kilowatt hour battery sizes. We're positioning ourselves as market leaders by providing the best in class warranties and return policies. So in particular, we're really proud of that 2-year battery warranty. And that basically warrants against excessive degradation for a period of 2 years. And if you're not happy with the vehicle, within the first 30 days, you can return it. I really doubt that anybody will be doing that. The potential benefits of emissions reductions. So these actions not only serve as to reduce the cost of EVs by aggregating those cost savings throughout the supply chains, but they also serve as an effective policy lever by having concentrated EV uptake in a locale. It's really cool that so many people are interested in EVs. We've only just started out really, and heaps of people are keen beans to drive clean. We've been featured in various regional newspapers, ABC radios on numerous occasions, recently national media attention in The Guardian, and we've been nominated for Community and Sustainability Awards. If you want to stay in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or head over to the website to subscribe to e-news. Just let us know if there's anything that you want to know, and we'll do our best to try and create content and materials that help answer all your questions and help you along the EV journey. So is more just providing thousands of affordable electric vehicles. We're also exploring and positioning ourselves to offer battery repair, replacements and upgrades for older EVs. So essentially keeping that embodied energy of those electric vehicles, keeping them on the road for longer and really maximizing that carbon emissions potential. We're doing our first battery upgrade at the moment. We're just doing that so that we know the process, we know that we can do it. And then finally, there's this thing that I'm most excited about is bidirectional charging. It's also known as vehicle to home, vehicle to grid. It's super awesome because it means that your car, that massive battery inside of it, can support your home. And it can also support the electricity grid. So imagine tens of thousands of orchestrated EV owners with vehicle to grid enabled vehicles in their garage or in their workplace. That's gigawatts of storage capacity to support greater uptake of renewables in the grid. That's the thing, is that EVs aren't just transport, they're incredible energy assets. All this is really cool, but we still have a lot of work to do before we get to a critical mass of EVs to make a significant impact. So we're going to continue to run bulk buys, provide individual sales and provide fleets. At this point, it's a good time to hand over to Carola to explain how she's working to support the electric vehicle revolution by providing smart charging solutions.
Lovely, thank you, Ant. Carola.
Great, thank you. Let me quickly share the screen. Excellent. Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, fleets. I think what Anthony just mentioned before in our chat is that when we turn over fleets, and they usually have their cars for like 3 to 4 years, then we see that second-hand market of cheaper EVs being created. And that means that we have enough EVs that can be afforded by everyone. And they're not just the higher price luxury SUV segment anymore. So to start with, I just wanted to show you a couple of images. None of these pictures are actually from Australia. They are all from the US and from China and Europe. But what you can see, charging will be the new normal. As we all take up EVs and we all drive EVs, we expect that there will be charging stations wherever we park our cars for half an hour to very long times. And so most charging will be happening at home or at work, where cars are normally parked for many, many hours. But you see lots of charging going into shopping centers, maybe your local council building, the swimming pool. So they're going quite a lot of different locations. And to show you what that actually means for EV charging demand, we touched on that earlier with the example of Germany. So these are the three biggest markets, the United States, China, and the European Union. And you can see that in the next 10 years, the number of chargers will grow from 5 million to 42 million. And so that means there will be ample charging infrastructure available. We don't need to worry about range anxiety anymore. This is now happening, and EVs by 2030 will probably be the normal car anyway. So just to come back to a couple of basics. So in the past, I always was asked, oh, but aren't there all these different plug types? And how complicated is it with all this charging infrastructure? How do you use it? Luckily, the industry has sort of like self-regulated because there is no mandated standard for a plug type. But there is now a sort of voluntary standard, and for AC charging that is type 2, and for DC charging that is CCS2 and CHAdeMO for the Japanese vehicles. So as you can see here with these different plug types, and yes, you can plug your car into a normal household socket that's in the first column here, and then you'll probably charge for many, many hours if your battery is quite large. If you then go into AC charging, that reduces the time a lot. And so an AC charger for a home can be anything between 7 kilowatt single phase to 22 kilowatts three phase, depending on what your home or your workplace allows. And then in the right hand column, we have the fast charging. That's the one that you build along highways, at shopping centers, where you can easily top up your car in anything between like 10 minutes and an hour, depending on how much is in your battery and how large the battery is. So when we talk about all these different home, AC, DC, just wanted to give you, again, an overview of like what these charging stations look like. And you can see with AC, there's small units that can be installed on your garage wall, inside your garage or outside your garage. Whereas the ones that go onto highway locations or potentially petrol stations in the future, they are the ones pictured on the right, and they're quite large. Again, like AC, as I said before, probably mostly for home and work and parking operators, because that's where your car spends a lot of time. The DC slower chargers, around 25 kilowatts, they are the ones that you see especially used by fleets and in depots, and also car dealerships. And then, as I said, the fast ones for the highway or airport. So the reason why we actually founded Everty was that when you look at an electric car charging station, it is sort of like your computer. Without an operating system and without software, they're not super smart by itself. But when you bring software into the game, you can not only monitor and manage and monetize charging stations so that you operate in your own car park, but you also have a tool that you can allow EV drivers to access your charging station and to pay via their credit card. And for anyone who wants to operate a charging station, that is obviously important, because you're not getting petrol for free. Like at some stage, you will expect EV drivers to pay for the electricity that you're supplying to them. And just as I mentioned before, these are sort of the industry sectors that we're working with. EV charging will be everywhere, whether it's like your stadium, your cricket ground, your commercial offices, multi-dwelling apartments, residential homes, retail locations, councils. As I said, like it's got to be everywhere. And so we're working with all sectors to allow them to easily adopt EV charging technology. As I said before, like you may at some stage want EV drivers to pay you for the electricity that you give them, or you might offer it for free. We have seen it in the early days that, for example, in shopping centers, charging is often free because the shopping center wants to attract the EV driver to their location. And also At work, a lot of employers actually provide free charging as a perk for their staff. But as that grows, we're already seeing there that even employers would like the EV driver to contribute to the cost for the electricity. And so you can basically combine these two business models, if you like. So this is just to give you a bit of an example of who we're working with. So for example, we've got a Sydney building with 300 apartments where the tenants share charging stations. And again, the developer of the apartment block said, why would I give something for free to an EV driver if the petrol car driver doesn't get anything from me? So they'll have to use the app and pay for the electricity. The same for the university that we're working with. That's a commercially operated car park. Again, all these people are very mindful of how to evenly distribute the cost and get a return on their investment. But then we also have customers like corporates who are not really looking at monetizing or taking payments. They're more interested actually in how you can get all the data and analytics. So if they have different cars for the finance department, the sales department, so they obviously need to do a cost allocation similar to what you do with your fuel cards. And so that's where, again, having software that sits on top of a charging station and enables you to do all these things. So if you are looking at maybe getting a company car, transitioning your fleet, or even if you're just someone who drives or will in future drive a company car that is electric, you need to really look at where will you charge them. So if you're taking the company car home, then yes, you're probably charging the car at home and you're paying for the electricity. So this time around, you actually want your employer to reimburse you for your cost because you're paying for it. You also want to look at how are these cars used during the day? Like what are their use patterns? Are they on the road all day and then they come back for let's say at lunchtime for half an hour and then they need to be on the road again? That means you probably want to look at faster charging stations for your corporate car park. So there's all these different things that you want to learn and understand before you buy an electric car and a charging station with it. Because in an ideal world, it's like getting married, you only do it once and you buy the right one. And so, of course, if you look at corporate car parks, there may also be constraints. If you want to install 20 charging stations in an old building, there could be constraints in load management. You might want to, if you have 20 fleet cars charging at the same time, you might want to schedule them and make these things inherently smart. So yeah, these are just a few considerations. I always say there's probably as many charging station makes and models as there are mobile phones. Not everyone needs the shiniest, newest, biggest smartphone, but there's certainly something for everyone's use case and budget. And yeah, so we're just wanting to help our customers making the right decision. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now.
Great. Thank you, Carola. And before we go on to some specific questions that we have coming in, I'm interested just in your take of what Carola has said. Does it resonate with you, or do you have differences of outlook with her?
Oh, well, I mean, being able to coordinate fleet charging is incredibly necessary to have a smooth transition. I think the thing about employees taking cars home, it's only going to cost you, if you're on a standard tariff, about $3.30 for 100 k's of range. And you can just plug into a standard power point. Probably much better if you do have a smart charger, which can be coordinated and visible on the network. But if you've got solar at home as well, then it's in tariff and $1.50 for 100 k's range. So even if you're not getting reimbursed from your employer, it's still a much better, cheaper way to drive.
Just with impediments, I mean, the virtues of electric vehicles have been made so apparent. I mean, to the point where Carola has now, in my mind at least, made me associate EVs with getting married, which wasn't something I thought I would get from this webinar initially, but maybe we can call them emotional vehicles from now. But but the idea in Australia of distance, and there's a notion of, I think sometimes when I have spoken to people about EVs, they say, look, that's great if you live in the city, but if you live 500 kilometres from Melbourne or something, and we have a question which basically says, our questioner says, I have a 24 kWh Leaf and would love to upgrade the battery at some stage. Will the larger battery sizes fit into the car?
Yeah, that's the beauty of the Nissan Leafs, is that the 24 kilowatt hour, 30 kilowatt hour, 40 kilowatt hour, and even the 62 kilowatt hour, they're all the same size pack. The 62 kilowatt hour is just a little bit, couple of centimeters thicker, but they all fit in there. So it's about 4 hours of labor to do the install of the new battery, and you've got a little translator tool that goes in between, and then a battery pairing tool to be able to make sure that the BMS, the battery management system, can recognize that larger capacity battery and reflect the range. It's a simple process, but it's tricky to source the batteries at the moment. So we're getting batteries. The good thing is the batteries can come from any territory, from the US, from the UK, from the EU, from Japan, but we're still only able to source secondhand batteries from cars that have minor damage. And yeah, we're bringing in good quality batteries that we still test and do diagnostics on, but until, yeah, it is possible. Long answer.
Right. No, but I think but one of the things in Australia too is the nature of our roads, that there's issues. I mean, driving on an Australian country road is not the same as driving on a Japanese highway or the Autobahn in Germany. Mm-hmm. Is the actual physical infrastructure of the road, does that play any part in the durability of the car, or is that not a consideration?
There's a lot less to go wrong in electric vehicles. There's so fewer moving parts. We drive the car all over the state, and Sam lives on a long dirt road. Yeah, they're fine. They've got lots of torque in the low end. They may not have that much clearance, but perhaps we'll be able to do a lift kit on them.
Right. So to another question, this is coming from James, and he's asking, what are your thoughts on Australian government EV policy or lack thereof? And Carola, I might go to you first and then to Ant.
Sure. So unfortunately, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to policy in Australia. Many countries have way more forward-looking policies and incentives. In Australia, so far, it's a few states that have gone their own way to either put in incentives for charging stations or getting discounts for stamp duty and rego. There is no federal clear policy. I believe the federal department has last year announced that they would release a federal strategy this year. As with all things, COVID might have delayed this, even though we would certainly hope that the politicians can work on multiple issues at the same time. And not everyone who's in energy or vehicle policy would probably be that affected by COVID. So I really hope that we are going to see that strategy. The problem with not having a consistent strategy is that the car manufacturers can only build a certain amount of or a certain number of cars. And so if you can produce, let's say, 200,000 vehicles per year, of course you give them first to Norway and to Germany, where there are policies where the vehicles are actually much more supported. So Australia therefore gets only a much higher priced vehicles. We do have like the Jaguar, the Tesla, the Mercedes, we're gonna get the Audi, but there's so many lower priced vehicles in other markets that we have not gotten here. And I think that would really help uptake if we had more affordable models.
Thank you, Carola. Would you concur with that?
Absolutely. And those vehicles which aren't provided in the Australian market, we're able to bring in. So we're working on doing all the compliance work for being able to bring in a number of other models. Hopefully it means that that's going to put pressure on the manufacturers, or at least demonstrate that their vehicles are wanted here in Australia, and perhaps we'll get squashed out of the market, which would be a fantastic outcome.
Indeed. Now I know that some large companies are part of the EV 100 campaign, and I might get one of you to explain that. And I noticed that AGL, for example, has a plan to transition to 100% EVs. I think it's by 2030. I think at the moment their percentage is running at about 10%. That notion of fleet investment, is that a crucial step in terms of opening up not only access to EVs, but the kind of notion that they are reliable, good, appropriate cars for Australia?
Absolutely, and it's brilliant to see companies like AGL taking the lead on things like this. We really need to see more corporate leadership in this space. It will provide more affordable vehicles once they do come off the books, and the demystification process is, invaluable. And I suppose having that uptake as well also provides that incentive or that message to decision makers that, we do need more public charging infrastructure in place, like all those things that support that broader rollout of electric vehicles.
And Carola, has that been the experience in the European context that you're familiar with, that government action around fleet purchase has been an important impetus to a broader acceptance of EVs?
Yeah, absolutely. So in many European countries, businesses get incentives similar to how we've changed our instant write-off for assets from 30k to 150k. You get certain advantages in different countries. Also, coming back to AGL, and IKEA actually also announced that they want to change their fleet over by 2025 already. I think when we look at the 2030 target, we're expecting that we see price parity in Australia at around 2025. And so if you're someone who purchases a car for your fleet, and then you have an electric and a petrol car side by side, it costs the same money, but running the electric car is much cheaper because less repairs, less fuel costs, then you'd almost be unreasonable or silly to actually buy that petrol car if the EV is cheaper when you look at the total cost of ownership.
Okay. And a question from Jill. Are you expanding along the eastern seaboard, and is there any structural reason why you're not expanding into New South Wales at this stage?
Oh, no, sorry. We're totally going into New South Wales as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah. No structural reason.
All right, good. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to another question. So is there room for community-owned charging bays and networks to help get more regional infrastructure? And Carola, I'll start with you. Is there evidence of this overseas, of community-owned charging bays?
But that is a very good question. We have mostly seen companies investing into charging infrastructure. But as we also see, and Anthony would have some good examples from his bulk buys where the community comes together, if there is already a group of EV drivers in the same area or location, it might just make sense for them to say, we'll pay an additional $1,000 each, like of the 20 or 30 people who bought the car, and then they can invest that into public chargers at locations that they prefer.
Okay, so that community, the community engagement, do you think that needs more work from all levels? Like, should the Department of Transport in various state jurisdictions or federal authorities, should we really be ramping up the message to Australians that electric vehicles are the way of the future, and they have a whole series of benefits, not only for transport, but that bi-directional charging that Ant was talking about earlier as well? Ant?
Oh, I'm obviously biased. I think the messaging should be out there on all levels, especially if there are benefits that can be seen and experienced by the organisations putting it out there. I think one thing that's often overlooked are the health benefits of electric vehicles as well. The fact that we are reducing emissions and the cost of particulate respiratory illnesses with nitrous oxide and PM2.5 from internal combustion engines, if you're able to translate that cost savings from health and be able to put that towards incentivizing EV uptake as well, that's not even taking into account mitigating the impacts of climate change. There's many reasons to be supporting electric vehicle uptake.
And so in the research that you've done, Ant, what are the impediments? What are the barriers that your research has uncovered?
On what level?
Let's go through some of those levels then. But if we start from consumers, I mean, Carola has already spoken about the fact that in other jurisdictions, the availability of cheaper model cars, it's not a top end luxury vehicle that brings you to EVs. It's a range of vehicles. Could we start there from a consumer perspective?
That's totally a valid point from the consumer perspective. I think the other one is just lack of credible information out there. I mean, a lot of people wanting to buy an electric vehicle might walk into a dealership and there's almost this bait and switch thing going on there, that you go in to look at the electric car. I've gone in to look at an electric car and had the salesperson try and sell me a conventional internal combustion. And I think that the reason partially behind that is that the business model behind selling electric cars just doesn't really stack up for dealers that are reliant on all those ongoing dealer servicing fees. And it might just be that there isn't familiarity, like that's your primary point of interaction with making that big capital outlay, that big decision, is that salesperson in the showroom. I think that's one part that definitely needs a lot of attention. Just more broadly, being able to understand and interact with the electric vehicles. So the more that we do these community bulk buys, or the more that there are just electric cars out there, the more they're just going to be normalized for people. You'll see a neighbor with an electric car and potentially even drive it. And I think that's going to be the more organic transition that'll take place. But other barriers that exist there obviously are the upfront purchase price. The perceived barrier of not having enough charging infrastructure out there. I mean, the thing is, you can plug in anywhere that there's a power point. If you think about it that way, there are millions and millions of charging points all across the country. And it's fantastic that there are fast chargers going in all over. But the thing is, most people are going to go with the most convenient option to charge, which is just to plug in at home.
Right.
It's that psychological barrier. And the other thing is also the range. Like, everybody thinks we need a vehicle with massive big range because we're Australians that live in the bush and travel 1,000 kilometers every day. Most people, 99% of the time, they don't have those long commutes. And it makes sense. Like, if you've got a second vehicle, have an electric car for the smaller runarounds and use your longer range vehicle, or borrow or hire one, and it's still probably going to be more cost effective. But I think that the Australian identity, the image that we carry, that needs to have a bit of a shift first as well. So that in itself would sound challenging. So in a way, we're wanting to kind of rethink the experience of how we use our cars and how we identify with our cars, that we don't need a great petrol chugging, huge 4-wheel drive to be the emblematic car of Australia. No, but unfortunately it is in a large way. I mean, look at all the utes that are out there that the government is subsidising through fringe benefit taxes. It's more often than not cheaper for a business to purchase a ute than it is to go and get a smaller vehicle, a smaller, more fuel efficient vehicle. So that's other kind of changes need to happen as well. One of the things that I'd like to talk about now, Carola, and also with Ant, but I'll move to Carola now, is this notion of grey imports, the ability to buy a second hand, if I'm on the right path here. Do we need a lot more policy impetus to bring about that change, that we would be able to import not necessarily brand new cars, but cars that would fit a lower price option and still have all the benefits of being an EV?
I think Anthony is actually much better equipped to answer that question. But one of the reasons why we haven't seen a lot of these grey imports is that if you bring in a car by yourself, if you under these special import requirements, And then you have something going wrong, you need spare parts, you need maintenance, you need all of the existing ecosystem is not there. But Anthony with his company, they're changing that. And it's great to see that obviously they're now they're providing 2 years warranty on the battery upgrades. So all of that could not happen if I personally just imported a car. It needs specialist companies like Anthony's to service that market so that people are not stranded with an EV if something goes wrong.
Right, Anthony, over to you then on this whole grey import topic.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there, and hopefully we'll see a lot more businesses jumping into the space. The reality is, though, that it is also, you know, I never thought that I'd be saying this, but I'm a secondhand car dealer, and there's definitely a lot of changes that need to happen in the industry. So hopefully if we're able to go out strong enough to begin with, we'll be able to set the bar for consumer protections. And I think that's a really, really important consideration. But I mean, you see things out there like Australia's going to become a dumping ground for EVs. If we don't have clear policy for electric vehicles, we're already going to be a dumping ground for internal combustion engines, and even new ones are going to be dumped into the Australian market.
So on that, to take that policy critique, which seems very significant to me, where does the policy have to focus to avoid those outcomes?
Gosh, well, I guess, so at the moment we're dealing with the import process. There's a rule change which is coming, which is going to allow for a more broad scale process to import larger volumes of electric vehicles and a wider range. I think that still needs to have some scrutiny in the process and just make sure that the vehicles that are coming through there's some sort of rigor in ensuring that they are decent quality vehicles. That the policy definitely has to look at consumer protections first and foremost. Right.
And is it possible to bring new electric vehicles through the grey imports?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
So we can. So that's good to know.
Yeah, the difference is, though, the way that I see it, the used electric vehicles have so much more benefit from the carbon emissions point of view. Like if they've been driven for the first couple of years of their life, they've already essentially offset even the CO2 in the battery manufacturer. Environmentally, I think it makes so much more sense to be able to repurpose those secondhand vehicles rather than having them just go to or wherever they go. If we have a whole flood of new vehicles, we're just contributing to the issue as well of having more crap out there. Wonderful electric vehicle crap, but there's still, we have to be really conscientious about what kind of ongoing issues we might be creating. And I think that's another thing that we're really looking into is different forms of ownership models. So not everyone has to own their own vehicle. If they're able to have a subscription or a lease of a vehicle, then that makes a lot more sense, particularly considering most vehicles sit idle for over 90% of their lives.
I do remember being in the UK some years ago now, to be honest, but I think it was called Go Car, and it was an arrangement where people did subscribe to a vehicle supply company, but you could order a car for the particular purpose that you needed it for. If you had a big family outing, then you'd get a people mover. If just you and your partner were going out for the weekend, you'd get a small car. Is that kind of shift in mentality? Electric vehicles will be really amenable to that, I imagine.
Yeah, this is probably a good one for Carola because the charging is a difficult one at this point in time. So if you're doing a short-term rental of an electric vehicle and you don't have off-street parking, how do you charge it and return it for the next user as well?
Carola, can you answer that question for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Europe, there are multiple companies that have electric car sharing schemes or car renting schemes, but they also have invested into their own charging infrastructure. They haven't gotten that on the back of someone else necessarily investing in it. But I think there's also a much bigger trend happening, and that is that young people do not want to own cars anymore, or many of them. A lot of them don't even get their driver's license. They know they can catch an Uber or they can get a rental. The whole rideshare and sharing economy is basically changing the way how we deal with assets. And so if I could just walk down the road and pick up a car and drop it wherever I wanted afterwards, like, yeah, that would probably make sense for a lot of people, because as Anthony said, like, cars sit idle for 95% of the time. And so that cost ownership model is definitely something that I guess a lot of young people are now questioning.
So thank you, Carola. And to pick up on that, Anthony, and to come back to you, that notion of EVs sitting idle, you mentioned vehicle to grid. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, well, I guess that then they're no longer sitting idle, are they, if they have a function? That is utilizing that capacity of the vehicle. So obviously you'd have to have parameters in place that you still have the available capacity for your future anticipated driving. But being able to have those battery packs aggregated, orchestrated together to be able to respond to frequency control, demand response in the energy market, or even just to be able to support behind the meter into the house or into the property, then you can start to derive benefit from that. And with the right kind of business models in place, you can have, what would normally be a depreciating asset start to work for you, which is pretty cool.
Now, Anthony, I do want to come back to this issue of range, because we have a question from Jez. And the question is this: are there EVs that can drive more than 400 kilometres without charge? He says, I'm in Sale, which is about 200 kilometres from Melbourne.
There totally are. It just depends on how much you want to spend. So the bigger the battery, given that the batteries are the largest cost of the vehicles, the more you're going to be paying. So yeah, there's cars out there that can get over 400 Ks, but you're likely going to be spending upwards of $70,000 on those vehicles. We're starting to see new ones enter into the market now that are getting close to that range, but they're still going to be pretty expensive. So,
What do you think is the key price point? At what price do you think attitudes begin to shift? Is it under $20,000? Is it under $30,000? Is there, from the research that either of you may have undertaken, is there a sense of how much people are prepared to spend?
Depends on the model. I mean, the most popular cars in Australia are SUVs. So when we start seeing electric vehicles come to that price parity point, the price parity of the upfront purchase cost, not the total cost of ownership, then I think we're going to see a really rapid transition. I think it's still a fair bit for people to understand that they're cheaper to run and own over time. Like at the moment, after about a 10-year period, your vehicles reach that cost parity, and that's going to get closer and closer until the point where there just won't be any difficult decision-making process at all in purchasing an electric car.
And Carola, has that been the experience in places like Germany and other European countries?
Yeah, well, I think coming back to the question that was asked, even if you do drive 400 kilometers a day, you wouldn't do it in one go necessarily, and you park and you do things in between, or you have at least like a lunch break or something. I recently drove an electric car from Sydney to Brisbane, and it was absolutely no problem, because all I needed for the whole 900 kilometers was 3 stops with between 20 to 30 minutes. And so all of these 3 stops were after 300 kilometers where I needed a break anyway. I needed to stretch my legs. So, I mean, I get it. There's probably always a use case where an EV doesn't fit. But in most cases, it's actually really not a problem. It's more perception than reality.
And in fact, the safe driving techniques that we are advised that taking breaks and driving without fatigue is actually an essential part of being safe on the road. So just with the grey imports, and back to you, Ant, again from Jez, when is it possible that the grey imports with a 400-kilometre range will start to come?
'Cause stealing our thunder. We wanted to make an announcement sometime. That soon, sometime. Keep an eye on there.
Now's your chance to break news on the EV Revolution webinar.
Sometime soon, there will be vehicles with longer range that we'll be bringing in very soon.
Okay, well, we'll hold you to that at some further point. So let's talk about battery warranties.
Yeah.
So people, will all batteries be the same, or will people start to shop around for particular types of batteries because they want particular outcomes?
Yeah, definitely. There's a huge variety in batteries. We're really confident with the Nissan Leaf batteries because we have a lot of data points on there. There's a organisation in New Zealand called Flip the Fleet that have been collecting user data. As part of our warranty, we'll also be collecting user data in 6-month intervals, but we'll be able to see what kind of charging has happened, whether it's been fast charging or slow charging, and the distance. And just understanding like that rate of degradation. Like all batteries are going to degrade over time. Nissan Leaf, they're not fantastic in the sense that they don't have active cooling. So it's a use case scenario as well. Like if you wanted to drive Uber, you wouldn't pick a Nissan Leaf. You'd pick something with liquid cooling that is capable of those higher, faster charges and more consistent driving. But if it's just everyday driving, it's totally fine. And so, yeah, that's also why we put the kilometre restriction in there. So if you're driving Uber, then the warranty will cover you for that, but for a much shorter period of time. So we do understand that there's plenty of data out there. And the reason why manufacturers put warranties on the vehicles is not so much that they'll be paying out all that often, is that they understand that rate of degradation. And so we feel really confident in being able to offer a warranty. And I think,
This might seem a slightly left field question, Carola, but the fact that there is less maintenance requirements on EVs, has that impacted on people whose jobs it is, like mechanics, for example, automotive mechanics? Will that be an area that will change because the needs of EVs are different, obviously, to the needs of internal combustion engines?
Yes, we would certainly see a lot of mechanics needing to be retrained. They probably need to understand the software in the cars a lot better to read that. Anthony was interviewed in an article by The Guardian where a mechanic made a funny comment. But yeah, it's a retraining. It's similar to when we unfortunately shut down automotive manufacturing. This is just the time, and it's the most important or most pressing thing is that we prepare for the change. We cannot not change, and we cannot avoid it and stick our heads in the sand. But we can prepare the industry for that upcoming change so they can service electric vehicles. But it might be fewer mechanics than currently out there.
And the nature of the work that will be done on EVs, as you've indicated, is more about analysing data than necessarily turning spanners, and it's about understanding the software, understanding the battery, rather than changing springs.
Yes.
To large.
Sorry.
Well,
please go ahead.
Most of the maintenance to be done on an electric car can be done at a regular mechanic. Changing the wiper blades and changing your suspension and your tires, like those kind of regular routine maintenance things still have to be done.
So do you think there has been best practice from what you know of other governmental jurisdictions that the Australian government might seek to emulate? Are there, whether it's Japan or Germany, are there countries that you think that's how we should promote EVs, that's how we should initiate discussions around fleet ownership, about public transport? Are there best practice that the Australian government could learn from?
So I would hope that the Australian government picks and chooses the best policies from a variety of countries. Obviously, Norway is a clear leader But there's so many interesting initiatives. California has announced that they want to see heavy trucks being transitioned to electric vehicles, and they're going to put targets in place and mandate that trucks cannot be diesel or petrol anymore, or gasoline as the Americans would say. In the Netherlands, they have done a very good job on public charging infrastructure that is roadside, like on the curb where you park for people who do not have off-street parking. So there's a variety of different policies, and I think it's, it would be great if Australia would look at all these different countries and policies and then pick the best ones and combines that in one really sound and amazing Australian EV policy.
Are you aware that that kind of work is being undertaken?
As I mentioned before, so the federal government has announced that they are looking at an EV strategy and an EV plan. The state governments have certainly done a lot. Transport for New South Wales, or the New South Wales government, they're consulting with industry all the time. They're also involving the Electric Vehicle Council in their consultations. So there's a lot happening, but it just needs a bit more coordination and hopefully a bit more strength from the top, from the federal level.
Anthony, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, if the last EV policy is anything to go by, in the last election, they had a very impressive one-page, very difficult to find EV policy. I hope that we'll see something a bit better.
And so for people who are advocates, for people who want to actually advocate on behalf of not only vehicle consumers, but more broadly environmental concerns, is it a question in your mind of activism directed at a new policy that more fully integrates EVs into a broader environmental understanding?
Absolutely. I think it needs community action. I think that the loudest community action that can be is having a few hundred EVs in your local neighborhood, putting them onto the low voltage network and, breaking the grid if need be, just to see what actually happens there. And the response to, it's very unlikely the draw of an electric car is similar to an air conditioner. So it's not going to be the case, but we need critical uptake to be able to show that it's not, a 3 to 5 year horizon, that it's actually time to take steps to support electric vehicles.
And do you think it needs to be linked specifically to the need to get rid of fossil fuel, that we need to basically acknowledge that fossil fuel has a limited future, has so many environmental problems, that this has to be that EVs have to be a critical part of a sustained campaign against fossil fuel use?
Without a doubt, but I think the argument may not actually win in the environmental points. That I think more so looking at fuel security. We've got a 2-week supply of fuel here that if we have any disruption to that supply chain, the whole country is going to fall apart. Whereas if we have electric vehicles, we can be powering it with what we have on our own roof in a lot of cases, and from locally generated sources. So I think that's a huge message which aligns with even the most conservative Australians. I feel like we need something that's going to be broadly palatable to mainstream audiences as well.
Right. Okay. Now we have a question that's come in, and Carola, I'm going to direct it at you first, but obviously, Ant, if you want to come in after, you're very welcome. So this is from Jasper, and he says, as a business model, has any major EV manufacturer or third parties ever considered to provide a battery lease model where batteries can be upgraded when range is starting to drop, also allowing for what he calls a circular approach at end of life to the most valuable component of the EV?
Yes, there are a variety of manufacturers who have considered that. There's also a Chinese US startup, or not startup, they're not that young anymore, called NIO. They are looking at battery swapping. where you basically, instead of recharging a battery, you swap it out. And then if a battery gets to a certain age or a certain degradation, they would just replace it with a new battery. So there's various different models that are being explored by the different car manufacturers. And I guess it's something where we'll see in the next few years which model wins.
And do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think there's brilliant business models which are coming out as well, utilizing those batteries in their second life. So being able to repurpose them for stationary storage. I mean, they still have a good 10 to 15 years of usable life as stationary storage beyond their transport energy provision. So I think there's the last question is just trying to figure out what to do at their final end of life, how to recapture those materials and put them back into the supply chain. And looking at the cost of commodities like nickel, cadmium, all the core elements for making batteries are becoming increasingly harder to source and more expensive. So there's going to be a really viable business in doing battery recycling as well.
Look, I want to float. We're coming close to when we need to wrap up. But I want to float what might be an odd question. Do either of you think that the focus on electric vehicles could be the spur to invigorating a manufacturing base for vehicles in Australia? As you know, Australia doesn't produce any more internal combustion engine cars, but does EV hold the promise of possibly invigorating manufacturing?
We could absolutely see that, and it's already happening. We see that buses are manufactured locally. There's also a company that has a light commercial vehicle that they're manufacturing locally. There have been a couple of announcements last year, especially looking at the old facilities in Adelaide from the incumbent car manufacturers to repurpose them. So yeah, no, I think we're definitely going to see that. And if we were to even take it a step further, Australia has, I think by now, 5 or 7 lithium mines. We could also build the batteries, not just the cars in the country.
Great, thank you. Last thoughts, Ant?
Oh, yeah, the lithium production, we're the largest producer of lithium in the world. It makes total sense to be doing all that value addition right here.
Great. Well, look, I want to thank you both, Carola Jonas and Anthony Broese van Groenou. Broese van Groenou, excuse me. I practiced all night too. To say that it's been really, really interesting having your thoughts and your expert contribution. So thank you very much for joining us. And I'd also like to thank the people who've tuned in. I do want to say, if you're interested in joining with others for an electric vehicle bulk buy through the Good Car Company, as Ant has mentioned throughout the webinar, please email Zeb, which is Zero Emissions Byron, at zeb@zerobyron.org with your details, and we'll put you in touch with him. I'd also like to thank the EV webinar coordinating team beyond the screen, Glenn Todd, Muriel Watt, Christabel Munson, and Bridie Schmidt for making all of this happen. Our next webinar, which is entitled Charging Ahead, will be held at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, October the 6th. So 6 p.m. on the 6th of October. Susanna Barbier, the manager of the NRMA's Electric Vehicle Division, and Josh Harvey, the head of strategy at Essential Energy, will be joining us to discuss readying infrastructure and the grid for the EV transition. Once again, Zero Emissions Byron warmly thanks its sponsors, including our principal sponsor, Bank Australia, our major sponsor, NRMA, and our community sponsors, Club Car, Innova Community Energy, and Light Touch Solar and Electrical. They have helped make this webinar series possible, and we deeply appreciate it. If you came in late or you want to share this webinar with friends, keep an eye out on the Zero Emissions Byron website at zerobyron.org/webinars, where we'll post a recording of this by the end of the week. I'm Mick O'Regan. Thank you for your company, and I look forward to you joining us next time for our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Awesome.